Board games, board games. We might be talking about teaching. Board games, because that's something we've been doing. Although I've been doing it a little bit less. But that doesn't mean that this will be a mess, because we both have experiences that we can draw upon when we can start talking at the end of this song. Board game design teaching is what we're talking about. Board game design teaching. I'm not gonna shout. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. 10 a.m. UK time for Busy Beats and Board Game Blabber. Episode 852. How can we teach game design well? That's what we're going to talk about. So, Joe Baxter-Webb, thank you very much for joining me. For those who've never heard of you, who are you? And what
Hi.
would you like people to know about yourself?
Hi, I am a game designer, multimedia person. I currently teach games, have done since 2018, I think. And before that, I worked in a mobile game studio for a bit as a designer and a producer. But I'm just into lots of different creative things, music, making animations and stuff. I'm a sort of jack of all trades and master of none, really. And I run a website called ludagogical.com, which is annoyingly hard to spell, where I review things and write little think pieces and stuff like that. Yeah, and that's me. And I was with you a couple of weeks ago, I think, and we talked about there's the link. Fantastic. And we talked about a similar topic. Well, not totally similar. And then decided that we'd talk about teaching game design.
Yeah, because teaching is what you do, like day in, day out. You are. Yeah, let's actually get into what that involves. When was your last day of teaching?
My last day of teaching was on Friday with my year
So
threes.
can
They're
we
just
talk about that maybe as a recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights. So on Friday, and you can talk about other stuff afterwards, but what did that involve in as much detail as you're able to give? What
so
is a typical day of teaching like?
it really depends on which year you're teaching. So Friday was with my third years, and the third years spend most of their last year making one final major project, and we do all the pre-production before Christmas, where they pitch something to their classmates to try and get other people on board, and then they do lots of design documentation, which would probably be a bit different from board games as it is in video games, but we do allow them to make analog games, board games, RPGs or whatever, but they use the same sort of planning and documentation process that they would for a video game. So it's all that on the Fridays. If I was teaching an early year, it might be a bit more hands-on, do this, now do this, now do this, teaching people to draw or teaching people to code something. But yeah, with year threes, it's very much, here's how you write a technical document. And if I want to put some flavor text in my technical document, okay, what am I going to do stylistically to make it's a lot of it's very similar to stuff that people in your audience will recognize from writing manuals and rule books, of that kind of what's the best way to present this piece of information about how this game works, lots of that kind of stuff. And it's very transferable to other disciplines as well.
A quick hello to Timmy. It's lovely to see you. There's you absolutely no requirement to be here every time, although it's lovely to see you when you do come in here. And of course, Joe Baxter-Webb, a lot of people, this is just generic kind of game design, and people are coming to it primarily for video game purposes, it's safe to say. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was going to say, yeah, for people in the
Yep.
audience like Timmy who are more
Yeah.
focused on the video games, this
Yeah,
might
totally.
be interesting as we talk about the parallels. Hello, Joe?
Well, so if you went to university to study video game development, development and you went to a larger university, there would be loads of
Oh, you are cutting out quite a bit. I think it might
okay.
be because of
Yeah, I'm tethered to my phone. Let's see.
yeah.
Any improvement? I'm just going to dance a little bit.
I can hear you okay when you said you're tethered to your phone, ironically.
Okay.
So the
Well,
troubleshooting is working fine just when we actually get...
just shook it around a bit like that, and it was fine. So if a lot of university courses in game development sort of require you to pick a discipline from the very start. You want to be a programmer or an artist or a designer, and the course where I work is a bit smaller than that. And because a lot of the intake don't really know what all the jobs in a game studio are, it's called game design, but it's really like broad spectrum game development. So in the first year, we will have people learning like very entry level programming and very entry level art and design stuff. And then everyone learns the game design stuff. And then as they step through the course, they'll all be doing game design on most projects. But they might then pick a specialism. And we're not broken into like a tech course and an art course. But people sort of do a bit of everything at the start and then specialize in year two. By the time they get to year three, they probably know when they work on that final major project whether they want to be the lead designer or if they, sometimes we will have, we've had in the past people that are very good at 3D sculpting, and then they've spent most of the last year making minis for someone else's game. That have ended up in like tabletop simulator prototypes and stuff like that. So we have to be quite flexible with the hard skills that we teach because people come in and they haven't necessarily had a go at everything before. Particularly the way the education system is at the moment. You have some schools that do the international baccalaureate at 16, 17, which is like you do everything. It's like a classical liberal arts education. But a lot of the FE colleges and a lot of sixth forms over the past 10, 20 years that have gone more vocationalist, if you've done a BTEC on one of those courses, you've just done one subject and maybe, retaken your English and maths for a couple of years. So we're teaching stuff that people haven't had an opportunity to do before. So it's really important that we give them almost like a foundation year on the first year where it's like, hey, do you have some hidden talent in something that hasn't been able to come out before, And
I think that's something that can be really good for higher education, giving people an opportunity to explore, giving people a space to explore these things. Because if you come to it let's talk about brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant? Let's be positive for the moment. Why is teaching a brilliant thing? I think that, by teaching, we know stuff and other people might not know stuff or other people might know stuff and we don't know the stuff. I mean, teaching allows us to share the information so that it's clearly a net positive. I mean, sure, there's little bits of time spent and whatnot, but, the information, and then using that information, people are then able to do things. I mean, putting that information hopefully into practical use, whether it's teaching other people to speak English or to make games or to paint, then people can go and actually get stuck in and doing those things. Mm-hmm. What do you think? Why do you think teaching is a brilliant thing?
My brilliant thing for teaching, in terms of just my own personal experience of it, is probably all of the opportunities you get to be proven wrong. It's like, it's like you're Mr. Miyagi and you're hoping that the Karate Kid eventually snatches the pebble from your hand or kicks you in the head. So to give a specific example, it's more like, you might have design preferences. And when you're teaching a class, you say, oh, you should never do this thing because this is always bad, auction games are always bad. I'm just going to say some random controversial thing. Auction games are always bad. And then you always have those couple of students that are like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to make a good version of that thing and you're going to eat your words. And that's the type of interaction that I really enjoy in teaching. It's like coming into the classroom with my own biases.
If you're using any broad strokes generalization like that, you're kind of set that you shouldn't be doing that.
Well, I think if I do it, it's usually in a sort of pantomime goading kind of way, you know. And
You
often
want to be proven wrong.
yeah, and often when I do make those broad strokes, they are much more to do with like the manageability of a project rather than design. You know, so often I'll be telling video game students, you know, don't have crafting in your game, don't have a complicated leveling up system, because that's just making the menus for that is going to take up a third of your project, and most people are going to play it once for 5 minutes. And we have the same thing in board games, right, where people go in with variability and replayability in mind straight from the outset, and it's like, okay, you need to make a game that people want to play more than once before you worry about how to make it replayable. So often when I'm saying these broad things, it's much more from a point of view of here's rules that someone who is just starting out might benefit from, because it will stop them over scoping, but they are often presented in a very pantomimish, over the top. I hate crafting, I hate leveling up.
Over scoping is the reason why people say, hey, if you're making a video game, try not to make Morpega. I'm never sure how to pronounce that. To massively multiplayer online RPG. And with board game in the analog space, people say all the time, don't make a trading card game, don't make a collectible card game, whatever you call it, because it's just going to be ludicrous in terms of scope. But then occasionally you will get someone who wants to prove them wrong, or someone who does it in a slightly different way, which can be really cool. But you have to first understand the reason for it, I think. And I think that, it does definitely, all else being equal, take a lot more resources to do one of those things. And Timmy says, not me, working on reverse engineering spatial OS. And do you understand what spatial OS is, Joe?
I'm quickly glancing at some. It enables creators to build rich, large-scale multiplayer experiences where hundreds or even thousands of players can play together. Yeah, that sounds like exactly that sort of project. But I think, you know, we're sort of obviously saying that a bit jokingly, but you can do whatever you want creatively as long as you understand why you're doing it. And if you're doing it to become a big business, you know, like the example of making your own CCG, where you need to understand things like the network effect and the fact that all of the socio-economics around why does this group of people play Yu-Gi-Oh? Why does this group of people play Magic the Gathering? And how are you going to get enough people who know each other in the physical world to all adopt your game at the same time? And you have to care about that if you want it to be a functioning business. But if you're just doing it for the love of the thing and to see how it works, you know, there's so much value in making a thing just to learn how those things work, isn't there? You know, the same with any sort of thing. You when you're making music, you don't have to be aiming to have a Christmas number 1.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting how, you know, if someone said, hey, I'm going to make a Morpega, but yeah, I accept that it's a really big thing. It's not going to even have any 3D graphics. It's going to be like a 2D roguelike Morpega. And then you go down and it's like a turn-based thing where the sprites move once every second. I don't know. And it's like, you know, intentionally they've made it lo-fi. I mean, this might, mean that it becomes its own game, unlike anything else. And B, it might then be something that they can manage, and they've actually analysed the things and learned. Because I think that what you say about doing whatever matters to you is really true. And I think it's really important to follow your passion and have passion in whatever you're doing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally.
Shall we talk about, maybe I'll go first because I've probably spent less time teaching than you have. And I'll talk about the situations in which I've been teaching broadly and how I did it. And I'll use one example of one specific case of how I taught, and we can then talk about that and then do the same for you. Does that seem like a reasonable format?
That's fantastic.
Okay, great. So let's see how I've taught in a few different scenarios. I was part of a game jam in Victor and Albert Museum of Childhood, where I was more of a almost mentor thing. The overall system was designed by other people, but I did personally engineer a, hey, let's teach people how to design games in Elephants and Castle, which I redid at a very small convention, and British Tate Gallery. And my audience was generally people who haven't designed a game before. But clearly, if they come down and they sit down to design a game, they must understand what a game is. I'm assuming that they don't need to be, they're already excited about games. Now, the key thing is, I had about 2 hours with each of these groups of people. I wanted them to finish up with something that they felt, this is me, I have made this. And I thought, okay, how can I limit the scope to make sure they actually get something done? Well, let me get rid of the art, get rid of the writing, and let's just work on a game with a traditional deck of playing cards. If you're not familiar with that, I mean, it's, even if you're not never seen one before, it's really easy to teach. Basically, there's 13 ranks. It goes from 1 up to 10, and then Jack, Queen, King, and that's repeated 4 times in 4 different patterns. And so you can instantly understand it. It's not like the tarot deck or something else where it's quite complex. I mean, there's a reason that it's survived, but even more than that, it's a familiar object. Now, I would present that, and I would try to quickly explain, okay, these are the, some people say that these are the 3 broad types of games. We've got fishing games, we've got trick-taking games, we've got set collection games and trick-taking games. It not only includes things like cards, it also includes ladder climbing game as an offshoot. With set collection, it might include poker, where the set collection means, hey, this set's better than the other one, let's bet on it. But then it might include something like gin, where it's like, oh, I've managed to make this set. Now I can get rid of these cards. I want to try and get rid of these cards. And I'd try and along the way ask people. So I would mention that it's more than 500 years old and have like literally 20 seconds about, maybe 30 seconds about the origins, just to get them excited. But straight away, then I would ask them, well, what do you can you think of any of these types of games? I tried to get people involved, and for me that was the key point. I did have the benefit that people who had sat down, there was lots of other stuff that they could have been doing that day. Like there were other exhibits they could have seen, they could have carried on shopping, or they could have carried on wandering around the convention. So it wasn't like they had an obligation to be there that day. They were super invested. And then I would ask them, okay, well, let's think about what properties a card has. And then I'd ask them to explain stuff. Hello, Yoda, it's lovely to see you. And I'd hope that they would tell me rank, obviously, and suit, but then also the direction of the card, whether it's face up or face down, whether it's red or black, like a binary thing. And then there's the angle of the card might potentially matter in something. If that's something that someone wanted to use in a game, then great. And at the end of it, I'd say, well, which of these things it sounds the most exciting? So straight away, I'd start trying to get them into some high-level thinking. And I would try to use my understanding of design thinking. Like if they clearly went down some problematic paths, I would mention, oh, this might be problematic because of whatever. Or one group made a game where it was about playing cards, and then one of the colors was positive, one of the colors was negative, and it was a cooperative game where you were trying to get it to be as close to 0 as possible. I have no idea, I can't remember how it works, to be honest, but I remember seeing that and thinking, yeah, that's quite cool. And yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. So it was, at that point, honestly, it was all organic. It was all a kind of improvised thing. And Joe, what would you say to that kind of approach?
I think it sounds fantastic, and I think you're right to sort of try and get the art out of the way, and because it's so hard for people to understand. I think it's a bit easier to understand in the board game space, but I think in video games, people don't understand what a designer does, and they assume that the studio is full of artists and coders, and then they make the design decisions as they're doing it. And it's like, no, the easiest way to there's an essay by someone called Liz England who wrote a thing called The Door Problem, and it's describing what a game designer does via all of the questions you would have to answer about putting doors into a video game. Like, how do we know which doors open and which ones don't? You know, all of these, and it's a list of about 30 questions about doors, and it's the most mundane thing. But I think, yeah, if you get the art out of the way, and people are immediately thinking about what's the component that makes up the game, and how can the players use that, and you know, what with a deck of cards, when I draw a card, you know, what's randomized on the card, and then what can I do with it as a player that is actually a choice? You know, I can put it down, I can turn it around and stuff. We do a series of exercises that I think they come from Zimmerman and Salen's book, Rules of Play. There we go, The Door Problem. And one of them is basically you take a game that everyone knows, and it could be tic-tac-toe or it could be a card game or whatever, and then you encourage people to play it and then change it each time. But you're trying to get them to focus their changes on the setup, the goals, or the turn-by-turn play, and you don't let people make more than one change each time. And then basically by tweaking it and changing it each time, they see how the game changes. And you'll be familiar with this, but you know, you change the win condition of a game, and it can dramatically change how people play the game turn to turn because of, you know, the reward changing the behavior and stuff like that. And much earlier example that was a lot more ad hoc. Before I became a lecturer, I was asked to do a workshop at a local gaming event, a video games event, and I wanted to do something that people could, because it was a convention and people were mostly there for video games. I wanted something that people could come and drop into and drop out of. So we made Morphopoly, and it was basically, it was Monopoly set up, and it was kind of, people could drop in and drop out and take control of a piece whenever they wanted. But there were 3 house rules, and every time someone passed go, they were allowed to veto and change one of the house rules. And it was really kind of just an exercise in them seeing how that changed things and then kind of talking about it. And it was interesting to see how different demographics, you know, if you got a group of 12-year-old boys, all of the rules would be about, oh, you've got to run around the table making a train noise or something to try and embarrass their friends. And that's kind of leading to what we would call discovery-based learning, where you can, as you say, you can front load things a little bit and go, oh, you know, this is probably going to do this, but until they've messed up in that way, and then you come back in and go, I told you that was going to happen. It doesn't sort of stick. So, you know, we have types of learning where it's very much, I'm going to teach you this and take you through the steps. But then you have discovery-based learning where you kind of just create a scenario where people are hopefully going to get something out of it. And you might be able to predict what some of those things are, but often it will be things you couldn't predict. And that works quite well in situations where you aren't aware of everyone's previous experience or skill levels. So, yeah, I think the sort of scenarios we're talking about where people are enthusiastic about games, but we don't know if they've made one before, we don't know what games they're familiar with. I think setting up a situation where they can just kind of find things out as they go along is really useful.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting, the example of Morphopoly, and I think that having Monopoly, even though it's becoming less of a cultural touch point over the last 10 years, I would say, because it used to be that everyone, you can assume, has played Monopoly at some point, but I think that that's becoming less and less true. And I think the next generation, I think it will start. I'm not going to say that it won't still sell millions every single year, but I think that I'm going to hypothesize that by the end of my lifetime, Monopoly will be a smaller. Yeah, I think it will sell fewer copies per year than it currently does. That's my opinion, because I think that people, yes, the gift giving thing where people buy, oh, that's a person who lives in Helsinki, maybe I should buy Monopoly Helsinki. And that's part of the nice thing where it has just been regurgitated so many times that you can buy a Monopoly for everyone, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But as a game, I think that it's reached a point where Catan, I mean, as much as I might have problems with Asmodee Embracer Group being this big conglomerate, it does have the budget to really position some of the games as modern classics. And I think, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? They absolutely are. Ticket to Ride, Catan, Carcassonne. I'm
Yep.
not going to disagree with any of these. I think these are all great games. They're all very approachable. And frankly, if someone hasn't played Monopoly before, the rules aren't that simple. Um,
Mm.
but regardless, the point is by having a touchstone, by having people change it, not saying that you are going to be responsible for all the changes, but you can play for a while and then the game will adapt. It reminds me of, I was straining, trying to remember the name. I don't know if you know this one. It's a completely analog game and public domain, and you start off with a set of rules where every turn you roll a die, you get that many points, and the first person to get so many points wins. I think it's like 50 points. And
Mm-hmm.
on your turn, you're allowed to either suggest a rule change, or you're allowed to change a mutable rule into an immutable one. So there's two categories of rules: stuff that cannot be changed and stuff that can be changed. And you're allowed to, change the categories. And whatever you
Mm-hmm.
do has to be voted, and everyone has to agree. That's the way it's originally set up. Do you know the game I'm talking about?
I don't know, but you are making me think of Flux, which is a
No,
very
no, 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 no,
divisive
no.
game.
That's far less. It is literally a vote. It
Mm.
is, and you just propose any rule change you want. So I might propose the rule change. Okay, from now on, we're going to roll a d10 or a d20 rather than a d6, and everyone passes it, and I think brilliant because I'm the first person who benefits from that. So it's got this little weird. Okay, we're making this game together,
Mm.
and you could change rules and say, okay, from now on, the win condition is having 6 farms, and we haven't even determined what farms are, but that's the new win condition. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and then we commonly make a totally different game. You could make literally any game using this as a starting point, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And that's a really interesting. It's a gamified game design tool, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
except that you're simultaneously trying to win the game, which makes it a little bit awkward as well.
Mm. I think, yeah, it's sort of important in the kind of literacy of a particular medium when it gets to that point where you can have these like meta media that are about itself. An easier way to explain that's a really good example. I think Flux is a game as well that's really divisive. I don't think it's particularly fun, but I think it's a really cool game for game designers to play because it's a game about rules. But if you think of like the first film you saw that was about filmmaking, or when a particular genre of music gets to a point where it's starting to become like biographical about itself as a genre. So things like movies like 8 Mile or the one about NWA or something like that, where you start to get to the point where people aren't just consuming the media, but there are actually things from the media that are telling the story or explaining how the medium works. That's fantastic for people's kind of literacy and understanding of that medium. And I think with board games, I don't get tons of students come in who have played lots of board games because they are a luxury hobby. And, if they have experience with tabletop, it tends to be D&D or some sort of collectible card game, because when you're a kid and you have pocket money, you can buy a little set of cards a week, but you can't always buy a £60 board game, right? And I think you're right about, there's kind of Monopoly as a touchstone. We are seeing just kind of a good barometer for whether other people know about a game is whether it's in Waterstones now, right? And I think that's a very nationally specific thing, because if you go over to Germany, there's a much more kind of much more widespread games literacy, and that's why you get companies like Spielmaterial. Have you used
Yes,
Spielmaterial?
absolutely. And I think this is a good reminder that really the first step of teaching anything is to know your audience.
Yeah,
Like in the
totally.
UK, you can say, sure, you might know this specific game, or you might be familiar with this. Whereas in Germany, if I were trying to teach game design, I would come there with a very different set of assumptions. I
Yep.
would assume that people would probably be more game literate. I might even I might still do the same things just to avoid the scope of having the, but I might actually then call it to redesign game jam or something like that to just get all of
Mm-hmm.
that out of the way to say we've got a specific set of components or um yeah, I think that sounds a little bit sexier, a redesign workshop rather than saying a workshop about making a game with traditional playing cards for the
Mm-hmm.
German audience. And so, yeah, that's probably what I do. Use some games that hopefully they've never heard of. I mean, I know they've heard of lots of games, but I'd be able to find a few different obscure things, maybe mix components of 3, 4 different games together and say, okay, what can you do with this? And follow a very similar pattern, frankly.
Yeah, totally. I think reskinning and redesigning things that are known is always a good practice because um, it's just one of the things I did with my master students last year. I gave them Lords of Waterdeep and had them reskin that because it's like just at the level of complexity where there's enough there to kind of get your teeth into, and I just kind of get them to go, okay, what are all the resources? How do you achieve goals using the resources? And then just completely reskin the thing. And I show them a project on Board Game Geek where someone reskinned the whole game to be Peaky Blinders. I can't remember the name of the designer. There's a project on Board Game Geek. They've redone all the art and everything. It's fantastic. And with video games, when you're programming something, it makes so much sense to start with, make Asteroids or Frogger or Pong and just make it work first while you're learning how to program. And you already have the design, so you're not having to do those two things at once. And then when you've got that, you can start to redesign it and tweak things. And I think a good analogy would be cooking, right? When you're learning to cook, you learn to cook a chicken korma or a spaghetti bolognese or whatever. And then you can go, okay, so what if I put a courgette in my spaghetti bolognese? What happens then? But then if you want to get to the point where you make entire dishes from scratch, you probably have to know 5 dishes and you look at them in comparison and you go, okay, what's the balance of this type of thing to this type of thing? What things go together? And you have to build up that kind of palette of consuming things and thinking about them in order to be able to make things from scratch. And I think the best way to do that is always, we keep coming back to this idea of like hacking or tweaking things that already exist to some degree, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I was kind of smiling weirdly at some point during that because I discovered that the game I was talking about is Nomic. And I was just trying to let me actually stop the thing and see if I can present it. There we go. Nomic initial rule set .rtf, which can be downloaded from Board Game Geek. So it is very legalese deliberately, and parts of the game is about work. It's about literally being a rules lawyer. You have to vote on these rules to appear or not. So the rules have to be really bleeping specific, if you know what I mean. And so you can see every player is an eligible voter. Every eligible voter must participate in every vote on rule changes. And there's rules about how you vote, what mutable rules mean. And these are the immutable rules that if you change them, then they might break the game. But that's part of the joy. And if everyone agrees, then you could change them to be mutable rules, and then mutable rules can be changed. I would very much like to make my own slightly simpler version, because when you read through these, come on, this is quite intimidating, right? I mean, this is literally all the rules of the game, but because of the verbiage, I think it is intimidating, don't you think? I mean, crowds, let me know what you think. But yeah, it feels like there's two things going on, and I can compare it to 1000 Blank White cards, if you're familiar with that at all, where the rules of the game are literally just play a card and the card does whatever. But then there's rules about sometimes you get blank cards, and on this blank card you can write basically anything. And 1,000 blank white cards, as it first emerges, is a creativity device where anyone could win if they're sick of the game by just putting down a card that says you get 1,000,000 points and say, well, that's enough points for me to win, hooray. But all that's told you is that they're tired of the experience, and then maybe you rip up that one card that they made and shuffle and draw again. And it's a game of mutual creativity. Like in one card, you might say anyone with drawing 10 drawings of monkeys on their cards wins the game, and you change to add a new win condition, and then other people start drawing monkeys on their cards, which can be quite a fun thing. And as long as everyone plays into this sort of fiction together, so there's definitely a balance of, are we going to create a game or are we going to play the game and try and make stuff fun? And can they really work together, or are they contrasting things? And hello, Xates, it's lovely to see you. I mean, what do you think, Joe? Do you think that you can have both the framework to design a good game and the framework to... Should it be an enjoyable process? When you're designing a game, should it be a fun, frivolous game-like process itself?
I don't know. I think the game you've just described, the 1,000 white cards, was it called? 1,000 blank.
Yes.
Cards. It sounds like a very extreme example, but it's also, it reminds me a little bit of kind of style negotiations when you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, because I've been in role-playing game campaigns where it was the right sort of people and everyone implicitly kind of knew what they were there to play for. It was kind of a drama kid group, and the rules were there to produce drama and create peril. They weren't there to be like a grindy tactical dungeon crawl type thing. And then I've been in situations where it's been mixed between those profiles. And I think D&D is a really interesting case study because it's such a big, baggy, it's set of varying expectations and different ways you can play it. And when you get tabletop groups together, there is often this sort of negotiation around what do we think fun is collectively. And the game you've just described sounds like that boiled down to just like one kind of party game. I don't think that... I think the problem with the question is to do with the word fun, right? I don't think every time I'm designing a game it's fun. Sometimes it's deeply analytical, and that tickles my brain in a way that I enjoy and I find pleasurable, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's fun to put all of the variables from a 100-card deck onto a spreadsheet and work out the economic balancing of a game. That's just like something that I find perverse joy in. But I'm not sure if I'd use the F word.
It is interesting because I hadn't read this particular edition of the rules before, but looking at it, it's again available on Boards Game Geek. So this is one person's write-up of 1,000 blank white cards, and then the actual rules are kind of less than a page. And then there's the epilogues to say, hey, this is what you can do, and this is what a card might look like, or is winning important. And yeah, it's interesting. Also, when you play that game, there's a big scope, but by saying I'm playing this particular thing, you evoke a certain framework, you evoke a certain set of assumptions. Like if I say I'm going to make a real-time game, you've probably got a set of assumptions in your mind beyond just the fact that it actually operates in real time, which some of those assumptions have good reasons for existing, like there should probably be a higher a ceiling on some sort of ceiling on complexity, a lower ceiling on complexity on real-time games compared to non-real-time games, because yeah, it makes sense. You've got to do these things quickly. But then there's other decisions, like okay, the idea that everyone has to be fast doesn't necessarily hold true when you've got something like Camelot. I mean, because one person could take twice as long over every decision and still win the game in Camelot, which is really interesting. Because sure, they'll get less time to do their moves, but it's not as if you've got any system of running out of time, and there's enough strategy in there that making the correct choice is the better move. Similarly with I mean, I'm trying to think of a better example, but yeah, in terms of deck building, I mean, Abandon All Artichokes is a deck building game, absolutely, because you add stuff to your deck. And sure, you can win by getting rid of all the artichokes, but you can also win by having just so many other cards and having cards that arrange the top few cards of your deck so that ultimately the win condition, you draw 5 and you don't have any artichokes. And that is a deck building game, but by re-examining a few key parts, by taking the powers, by using the powers straight away, by changing the win condition, as you said, that makes a massive difference. And I think that when we're thinking about games, as C.T. Nguyen says, agency is art, if we are to look at what shapes our agency, it is our goal. It is essentially a combination of our affordances and our objectives. I don't know if you can think of anything else that I'm missing right now, but if our affordances and objectives, well, that objective might completely change which of these affordances are the correct moves and which of them are the wrong moves. Would you agree with that analysis, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic sort of model. You know, where am I trying to get? What tools do I have to get there? And you know, our objective might be a particular experience for a group of people, and our affordances are like, okay, well, what tools do I have in my designer's toolkit to get there? And this is why, you know, to bring it back to kind of the topic, if you want to teach people about game design, one of the best things you can do, rather than going, right, we're going to make a game, is to play some games and go, what was going on there? Because, you know, to take deck builders for an example, I like deck builders, I like engine building, and they really nail engine building as a core thing. And one of the things I really like is the relationship, you know, the idea of overloading your deck with points cards that reduce the efficiency of the deck. I love the link with the theming in some games. So even in Dominion, the idea of having duchies or provinces as these cards that clog up your deck sort of gives a sense of bureaucracy of running a kingdom, of, oh, I've got all this land, I can't possibly deal with the blacksmith today. And the way it's handled in Clank is those scoring cards are books, big heavy tomes. And you've got that theming of like, oh, I want to crawl through there, but oh, I'm carrying so many of these big heavy books and they're valuable, but they're cumbersome. And so the more you play these games, then you're able to see these kind of more abstract general links of this is how that mechanic works and this is why it makes sense. You know, it's bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is cumbersome in one metaphor, and it's high value heavy objects as cumbersome in another. The model you were talking about trying to, you know, get people to think of affordances and objectives. There are a couple of models that we teach in like academic game design college, and the old one was MDA, which is mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics. And luckily, this has been replaced recently because I found it really difficult to teach because aesthetics is such a complicated word. Most of the time, if people just say, you know, we've even become, you know, aesthetic has just become a noun now, like that vaporwave joke of just saying aesthetic over something. But most of the time, if people say something is aesthetically pleasing or something has an aesthetic, they're talking about its audio-visual qualities. But in philosophy, when we talk about aesthetics, we're talking about people's emotional reactions to things and then how you produce them by making art in a particular way, right? So there are particular aesthetic choices you can make as an artist that will be calming, right? Or will be exciting or whatever. The newer model that we tend to use is design dynamics experience, DDE. And it's a bit easier because experience is what was meant by aesthetics in the original model. It's like the emotional thing that comes out of the game.
So does that mean exactly the same thing, but with different words?
Pretty much, yeah. It's what
Okay, so like,
what the designer does, how it all works together in context when players are playing around with all the stuff, and then the experience, the emotional aesthetic experience at the end of it. And
so
it's
for
just a bit
example, if we
easier to
looked at
teach.
poker,
Yeah.
the way that you bid and the value of different things would be parts of the design, and then parts of the dynamic would be the fact that you can lie. And well,
Yeah.
not that you can lie, but the fact that sometimes you're putting in a bid when you don't think you can win in
Hmm.
order to scare other people. And then the experience would be the tension of bluffing, the visceral thrill of, oh, will that person stick around or not? Is that
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
frame there?
exactly. So, to take your previous example of thinking of like the assumptions we have around real-time games, I usually associate a real-time, particularly like a cooperative real-time game, with everyone sort of shouting at each other, and you're
Mm-mm.
kind of getting all excited about the
And
thing.
that's very much in
Um,
I guess that could be part of the dynamic
mm.
because it is something that's brought upon by the rules because in order to communicate quickly, you have to shout.
Yep, exactly. But then the kind of emotions attached to that and the kind of social
Mm.
experience is the end experience. So again, the more games you play, the more you can work backwards from that experience. I think I brought up the Bill Bailey joke about working backwards from a laugh last time, but
Mm-mm-mm.
you're able to then go, what normally makes people feel this way? And a lot of the time we do this innately. There's that phrase that you have taste before you have talent. So what a song that sounds sad sounds like. You might not be able to put your hands on the piano and make it make those sounds, but you know what that sounds like. So once you do know how to do the hand stuff, you can work backwards to design the thing. So we know what sort of things we would put in a design to get people sitting around and going and scratching their head and conniving or whatever. We know that from playing games, and then when we design, we have that kind of that toolkit. Um, there's a brilliant quote. Eric Lang from
Yeah.
Blood Rage and Ankh and everything, because he's an interesting designer. He's one of my favorite designers, and I don't think I don't know. He's not someone that always comes out in people's top 5 favorite designers, but I really like his commitment to making what we would describe as Ameritrash games that are very theme heavy, but putting very thinky, crunchy Euro things in them. I really like that, and he said something about how he kind of works backwards from imagining the conversations people would have about the game after they played it. So, imagine 2 friends in a game shop and they point at a box on the wall and they go, "Oh, I played that with my friend the other day and they got a big dragon and they took over my country and then I snuck in and killed their dragon with a ninja." And it's all thinking of that kind of almost playground fantasy level and then working backwards to create the rules that enable that. And I think that's a really good model, but you can only really do it if you have a good kind of games literacy in the first place, which is why I just keep coming back to play more games, play more games, play more games.
It's an interesting one because I think that in some sense, analyzing it's about doing it mindfully. You can't just play the games, you've got to do it in a mindful way. And I would posit that, yeah, even though it is an expensive book, building blocks of tabletop game design, reading through that will probably help you more in game design, in my opinion, than than spending the same, maybe even than spending twice that same amount of time just playing games, even if you do it in a mindful way. Because here's a book that, maybe skip the examples, don't feel like you have to look every example up. Just go through the book, skip the examples page, and you'll get through it within a day of reading. And you will have a proper understanding of the breakdown. And I kind of think that it's about having lenses. I know that we're getting to the end of our hour, and I would like to ask you the questions that I put at the bottom. So, what are the things that we would focus on teaching? What are the things that we would prioritize? I mean, for me, I feel like it's about, clearly because I've only got, okay, people are going to be here for 2 hours maybe, and in the shopping center, I kind of had to say to them, well, it'll be 1 hour, knowing that if they got into it, it would be a second hour. Because in a shopping centre, no one's going to just randomly sit down in a kind of pop-up art type venture and sit down and engage for 2 hours when they've been planning to go around their day. But if it's someone who's into it, and then maybe they've even got their child with them and are having a nice day out, they might be, oh, well, I thought I was going to be home at 5, but you know what? Maybe we'll have dinner at 6 or something tonight because we're having a good time. So for me, I think that it has to be, I would focus on teaching the depth, like just focus on making sure you go deep enough and understand the building blocks. Not necessarily all the building blocks of all games, but within that deck of cards, okay, what can this do? What can this do? And ask people to actually look at people and analyze it, and getting people to make lists. And if I were to do the hypothetical redesign contest in Germany, I would probably ask people, okay, this little tile, you might have seen something similar, but what can it do? You could throw it. You could place it on the table. You could try and stack it up. You could try and make a little house out of it. You could glue it to a box and, try and get people to explore the possibilities. I think that kind of exploration of possibilities within a small, limited scope is the thing that I would focus on. How about you?
I think it depends. Yeah, so much of this depends on the scenario and who you're dealing with. But I think that kind of example of taking a micro game element and really breaking it down, I like that. I think the first thing we should always be trying to teach people is what is game design in the first place. So, those sorts of exercises, you can do it with a Pokemon card. Great exercise with a Pokemon card is break down all of the elements on the card and then ask them what they think the job title of each person involved in it was. So what bit does the graphic designer do? What does the illustrator do? Is there a different person who colours the illustration? Okay, in all of this, what is the game design? And then you probably eventually get to the point of, balancing it so this is not overpowered against it. Yeah, cool. That kind of thing. I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what it was. I will come back to it in a minute if I can. But yeah, I think, and the other fundamental thing that I think people struggle with at first, and you can make games totally for yourself. You can sit and make a single player game and play it on your own. But I think the thing that a lot of people struggle with early on is understanding that when you make games, they are for other people, and you don't really know if it works as a game until you've given it to other people, because you're always, even if you've written the rules down, you're going to be playing with unwritten rules in your head. And that's why it's really good to play with like trollish people that will play your game wrong. I always do that. Whenever I sit down to play a friend's game, I pick a strategy that is just really weird or seems broken in some way. And I just laser hone in on that, because doing that is usually so much more helpful to them than going, oh, I don't know, I think this is just play it like a bad person or a terrible person.
Through the design journey, I absolutely 100% agree. But I think there is a point in the game, frankly, where I might make a game, and for the first ever playtest, I'll be saying, this definitely isn't balanced. I'll probably have to make up different rules on the fly, and I just want to know if there's something fun here. And that point to me is much more important. I mean, I'm not going to spend any, sure, there's some intuition, so you probably won't have cards that are 10 times more powerful than the other, but might you have cards that are twice as powerful as another? Yeah, I'm human, and it's a brand new game where I'm mixing 4 new mechanisms that have never been combined before. And so, yeah, I don't know what's going on, and it's not because I'm a bad designer or a bad developer. It's just because my focus is on trying to work these things together to try and work out something where it is fun. And if I need to make rule changes halfway through, I will do that. And hopefully by presenting it that way, it's a slightly different playtest to the ones that you're talking about.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I think my crucial things are Understanding that games are made and made by people, and then understanding that games are for people and to be played by people, because it's, you know, it is totally valid to just make games as a little craft project that you want to. But I think to really understand what game design is, you sort of go and listen to game designers talk about stuff, and you know, play games with people, because that's what they're for, ultimately.
I love this because when you talk about what is it and what you're doing, there's definitely whatever you're doing, it's important to think, what am I doing and why? And having that question raised at the start of a course seems brilliant. So are there any quick stories you can share of something that went particularly well, something that you feel like, yeah, that was really good, I would definitely do that again?
Ooh, well, one of the ones that we've been doing year after year we have a foundation year for students that aren't maybe for whatever reason ready to go straight into the first year of the degree, and the brief we've given them every year, because they do a bit of game design and a bunch of other stuff. The game design brief we give them every year is an 18 card game, which is just a jam idea I stole off of BGG, and it's like you can have 18 cards and you can have 5 other components. And this means that we have a lecture right at the start where I take them through loads of unusual uses of cards. We look at tableau building. We look at how that works in Kodama, where you have cards that don't, where the art makes it all wonky. We look at things like the Bloody Inn, where you have multiple use cards that go under each other and have loads of different iterations. We look at Palm Island, where you have the entire deck of cards in one hand, and Gloom with the transparent cards. And, you know, it's like you were saying earlier, introducing people to the complexity inherent in just what are all the ways, all of the things you can do with this information on this card and where it is and stuff. It's a really good entry-level design task. And I think if people do that sort of thing before they even try anything on a computer, it's a good idea, because you start to understand, oh, if I'm going to program all of this stuff, there's actually loads to think about, even just to do a simple interaction like, where is this object? You know, does this person have this object, or is it on the floor, or whatever? So, yeah, 18 card challenge. Any of those little game jam type exercises that really narrow down the scope of a project is a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, that feels like a really good point. And obviously that's something that I try to do myself by lowering the scope. But within teaching, what would you suggest that educators try to avoid? Or is there any signs that you might say for a student, hey, maybe this isn't right for you, and maybe, do you know what I mean? This isn't a course for you. What pitfalls are there within a potential game design course or teaching or workshop or whatever?
It's a difficult one. I think a lot of creative people are by nature quite introverted and thoughtful people, and sometimes that can mean we want to do everything on our own and not get stuck in. I used to be I'm a recovering introvert, I like to put it. I think a lot of the things we associate with introversion are actually just being around the wrong people a lot of time. But it's kind of, I think if you want to continue to enjoy doing a thing, even if it's just, you know, to make enough money doing it so that you can dedicate more time to it, you kind of have to get over those social hurdles of not feeling comfortable asking people to play test, or, you know, not feeling comfortable putting your work out there, or any of that kind of stuff, because everything only gets better by exposure. And like, one of the things we do with our students is we try and get them going to conventions and doing demos and stuff even before their last year of the course, because I've seen this before at video game conventions where someone has a fantastic game and they've been working on it in a darkened basement for 5 years, and they're sat there and they don't know how to hustle or talk to people. And it's so depressing, because I can see that their game is better by my standards than the one that's getting 100 people play it down the line. But it's just that group of people have a bit more and I don't think that's something.
Very different sets of skills, though. I mean, marketing your game or demoing it. I mean, demoing is part of marketing, let's be honest. That kind of skill compared to the skill of creating the game itself. I mean, if you're good at design, I would posit that you might. Are you going to be better at demoing your own game?
No,
maybe.
I, a lot of the time, no. But I think there is a degree of any creative field, particularly if it's one where you have to freelance. You're going to have to put yourself out there. You're going to have to negotiate with clients, all of this kind of stuff. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like singing and dancing, but feeling okay with playing.
For the
I would call
record,
it.
I do literal singing and
Yeah,
dancing.
yeah,
If you come to the
exactly.
stand and you play the correct change.
But what was I going to say?
Oh, you were just
You're
too
gonna have to.
distracted by the thoughts of you
Yeah,
just
yeah.
need
It was.
the
It's such a
acceptance.
good man.
And although this may be strange, now is your chance to see me do song and dance. Hey, that's
It's.
song.
I call it playing rejection chicking, because a lot of the time when we don't want to put ourselves out there, we don't want to ask someone to play something or whatever. We're worried about, oh, that person's going to say no, or they're going to say it's rubbish, and just kind of deliberately playing rejection chicken enough times so that you build up a bit of a thicker skin, and you know that actually when someone plays your game and it's a bit rubbish, they're not going to like flip the table over and set fire to the convention hall or anything like that. And the only way we can get over those sorts of anxieties is by continually doing the thing until we train our brain to understand that it's not as scary a situation as we think it is. That's the kind of general stuff that I think it's quite hard to explicitly teach people about having a creative career or doing well in a creative hobby, but you just kind of have to do it. And I think, like the last time we spoke, I said the thing where you can learn the most is often the thing that you avoid doing. Whether it's like doing the balancing or whatever particular part of the field that you avoid, like just going and jumping in it occasionally, having a go is nearly always a good thing to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when I asked you what pitfalls there are, you didn't talk about, the actual teaching or the design. You talked about the supplementary skill, which I would do agree is vital. If you're in, pretty much everyone these days has to have some level of self-marketing. I mean, unless you are in a job and you're going to have that one job for the entire rest of your life, and your boss or the systems are in place for you to say exactly when you'll get a raise, and there's no scope for negotiation there. I mean, I don't know if that situation even exists anymore, because pretty much anywhere where, even if you're going to have the same job for the entire rest of your life, you'll have potential to come in and say, hey, could I get to raise? And you have to market yourself. You have to say why you're helpful or whatever, unless you've got like the most amazing boss, I guess, who's able to overlook that and be like, you know what, they're terrible at explaining why they're brilliant, but they are brilliant. They clearly deserve, way more than, and every time you change your job, and in the creative fields, every time you launch a new project, every time you are part of a team, and it's really, really difficult. All these, do you think it's important? How important is it for universities to teach these essential adjacent skills, let's call them?
It's difficult, because I think when we say the word teach, we're often thinking of a didactic situation where someone tells people stuff. And with stuff like that, soft skills, you can't do that. I mean, you can stand there and go, you must do this or this will happen. But for things like that to really click, you really have to create scenarios for people to have opportunities. And then if they take them, they take them. And if they don't, they don't. I don't think you can take a group of 30 people and say, I'm going to teach all of you to do this thing, unless you can really strictly make them all do the same thing. And often we can't, if even with things like giving a presentation, we will often have students that have, a way of saying, well, I need to not do this because it causes me so much anxiety that it would be detrimental to me. And often we try and reduce that. So one of the ways that we teach presenting is, particularly in the first year, we never have anyone present to the whole group. We do groups of 3 presenting to each other, and then they swap groups and they all present to each other. And the idea is that by presenting the same thing 5 times in tiny contexts, you actually feel yourself get better at presenting. Whereas if you just stand in front of the class in year one and have to give a presentation, you probably won't even remember it, because like stressor hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are amnesiac, so they make you forget stressful things. They're like
Yeah, and
antithetical
doing
to
that one
learning.
time, and also not to mention, you've kind of taken the time away from 29 other students who've had to listen to this one thing.
Yeah.
And that's not, I mean, is 3 the correct number? Would 4 or 5 be better? I don't know. But it's like, I mean, out of curiosity, why 3? Why not
Well, I mean,
5?
it might be 4, it might be 5. It depends on the group, but it's just about it's about doing it micro, so it's less daunting. But it's also about the repetition as well, because if people
Yeah,
just do
understood.
something once, then they don't feel themselves improve. You need to sort of show people that they can improve, so that they then know, oh, when I do this thing, I get better at it, which we know. We all know this. We know this about learning to drive. Every time we've had to learn something that we really needed to do, like learn how to drive or learn how to use something in the kitchen, we've learned it because we needed to. And we know that if we just do something a bunch of times, we get better at it. But for some reason, we don't carry this around with us and apply it to things all the time. And I don't know why that is, but teaching people that they can learn just by repeating something over and over again. You know, we should do a board games skills for life kind of alternative stream, or write a song about it or something. I don't know.
What you mean, like the utility of presentation and the utility of understanding arithmetic and understanding a budget, or
Yeah, like I don't know. I've given
we've
up at that
gotten
point
to
of
the
the
end
idea.
of the show. We've gone a little bit over the hour. Is there anything else that you would like to say on this topic? When we look at it all, what do you think is the key part to teaching game design well?
I think the wonderful thing about games and about teaching games is that they have everything that humans have ever done before in them. They have the potential to be about stories. They have the potential to be about visual art. They have the potential to be primarily about an interaction between a group of people. So they are so varied. That makes them difficult to teach how to make, because they're so different. And I don't think it's even appropriate to treat them all like they're the same thing, because we do, and it's so broad. But I think one of the good things about games is you can jump into it and then work out what creative thing in that interests you. And it might not actually be games. It might be illustration, or it might be writing stories or something like that. And I would say, like, in terms of the broadest application of games design and games design education, that is what games design can do. It's not about producing loads of games workers. It's saying, hey, here's a big collaborative project where we need a programmer and a graphic designer and someone to make the music. Come and pick up some tools and have a go at doing a thing, and we'll all make this slightly broken, wonky piece of art together. And I think that's really the value of making games and learning to make games, is working out who you are. Because with university, most people, when they're 18, they don't really know yet, and they haven't really tried enough things to go, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. But we kind of push people to do that. So having a broad project where it could be about any of these different things, I think that's really what making games is about for the most people who do it.
Thank you very much. That's a super lovely way to finish off the discussion. And I've asked you a lot of stuff. I would like to ask you to ask me. Now, a question of the day. Question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. What's the question of the day by Joe
I
Baxter-Webb?
would like to know what's on your jumper. I can't tell if it's a jumper or a dress, but I can see that it's festive in some way.
There is. Okay, let me actually lower it slightly. So, it is a jumper. You can see this is the lower part of the jumper. That's the bottom of it. And there's a little fireplace where in here there's actually space for a mobile phone to be put. The idea being that if you had a video of a fireplace going, it would be like you had an animated fireplace. So it is a
Amazing.
novelty jumper. I did not buy this myself. I got this many years ago. I think it might have been 2015. No, 2014, I think, actually. Because It was at a toy thing, and I said I don't have a Christmas jumper, and someone said, "Oh, I've got plenty of them. Would you like this one?" And I said, "Sure." And so yeah, that's how I got this jumper. True story.
Amazing. I think you should put an animated fish tank in it on Christmas Day.
Just so there's fish swimming around in the fireplace.
Yeah.
At this point, um, question of the day to everyone else out there is, yeah, what's on your jumper? Are you wearing a fancy jumper or is it plain? Joe, is your jumper just plain navy blue? Yep. So over to you. What are you up to? You can share button if you want to. What are you up to? I am hoping to head off to Glasgow tomorrow. I am marginally concerned because I'm still very much under the weather and I'm not wanting to pass that on to my, parents. And so, yeah, there are a few things that I have to do and are kind of alarmingly overdue. But I'm going to try and do the best I can today, and I'm not going to beat myself up. Um, yeah, I'm not going to say more than that. But like, is there something that you want to do, something that you have to do, something that you're looking forward to? Please do share. I promise that I care. What are you up to, Joe? What about everyone else?
I'm going to sit and do some scribbling because I haven't done that for a while. And when I've been doing lots of wording, I find it's really helpful to sit and do some scribbling, even if it's just drawing the plant or something.
Nice.
Is anyone else going to do some scribbling today?
I had no plans for scribbling, but you know what? Because of what you said, I'm going to draw a cat very quickly. It's not like a good cat, but here is my cat, inspired by you. I drew that
Amazing.
just now. That cat would not exist if it weren't for that conversation. um, my achievements of the day. So we had a lovely chat to recap and wrap up before we finish up. We talked about pre-production, having flexibility in small universities, making sure that people get the opportunity to explore what they're doing. Sometimes the lovely thing about teaching is being proven wrong. Obviously, we talked about rules being affordances and objectives, about the mechanics design aesthetics framework, but the design dynamic experience is a new term. Working out what exactly design means, whether that's showing a Pokemon card, trying to um, explain the difference between that and illustration, maybe trying to make people understand that it's on par with illustration, which is a lot more visceral, maybe. It is by people and for people, and having those constraints, whether it's an 18 card game with a few extra components, or whether it's saying you're doing it exactly with these things, a traditional deck of playing cards and nothing more, and having the guidance, because ultimately it feels like it's less didactic. It's more about suggesting a series of exercises and giving people the framework and utility and potential to get the feedback that they really need. Um, we talked a little bit about how marketing is so important. We talked about how you can set things up where people are talking to each other over and over and over, and think about it. Yeah, if you have groups of three, that means that you've got twice as much listening as you do speaking, whereas groups of five would mean 4 times as much. So maybe that's not as good a ratio. So maybe three is actually the perfect balance, because on the advantage of five is psychologically, does five feel more like a crowd and more like a real thing? But we also talked about the idea of saying, okay, you're playing knots and crosses, but you're just changing the objective. How does that work? A game, it's designed by, oh my gosh, forgot. It's actually designed by Peter Suber, as you can see there, despite the fact that it originally appeared in this book by Douglas R. Hofstadter. And so, yeah, Nomic and 1,000 Blank White Cards, which are frameworks for design, frameworks, and in a sense, 1,000 Blank White Cards is itself a short course in game design where people are thinking, okay, what? Wow, I can do this. Wow, I can do anything, and are thinking about the ramifications. Because ramifications of any given rule, to me at least, seems like the heart of what game design is. And then we talked about jumpers and what we're up to and scribbling. And I drew a cat. Is there anything else that you would like to say at this point, Joe? Um, if you want to check me out, obviously Stuff by Bez, and tomorrow I am chatting to yes, Basi Onwu Anaku. And so I'm looking forward to meeting them. Basi is from Nigeria, and we'll be talking about their personal story and working out what they've been up to. And Friday will be a very quick show. Saturday, Sunday, I might be chatting with Matt Green about the redesign contest that ran many years ago. It's coming up to 8 years. Yes, Joe, where would you like to be found? And is there anything else that you would like to tell everyone?
You can find me and even email me on ludagogical.com. I'm not anywhere else at the moment. And what I would like to tell everyone is just to have a nice couple of weeks. And I know that people don't necessarily do Christmas, or sometimes people don't like Christmas. But whatever time you've got off, to enjoy it and rest and, have the best time you can.
Thank you so much. And hello, Joanne. It has indeed been a long time. I'm sorry, I think I owe you a reply, but we are just finishing up. I hope you're generally well, and lots of love, Joanne. But at this point, I just want to say thank you, everyone, to everyone who jumped in. Thank you, most importantly, to Joe for this super lovely chat. And the only thing I'm going to say at this point is lots of love, and of course, bye, 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 bye. This is goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye bye, everyone. Lots of love to you. Bye bye.